Hiya, it is Talking Reds. I had a little delay there before we go live, just to make sure that the intro is not catching up with us beforehand. I'm Josh Sexton. This is Emilia Bona. We're going to do a bit of a throwback today to an old style team talk. Tour player subscribers may know what team talk is. If you don't, if you are watching the Anfield Wrap for the first time on YouTube, welcome. If you are watching us for the first time, you've not seen any subscriber shows before. If you're just watching us just because you watch on YouTube, then fair enough. You might want to subscribe at some point. Download the Anfield Wrap app. You'll get free tokens. You'll be able to access our podcasts, our videos. The team talk is now a video. It used to be a podcast. There's a lot of admin going on here. But basically what it has always done, is reacted to Jürgen Klopp's press conference. And Emilia, what I would say at the start of that is, hiya, it's the team talk. I'm Josh Sexton, joined by Emilia Bona to react to Jürgen Klopp's pre-Wolverhampton Wanderers press conference. And Emilia, there was some really interesting quotes from Jürgen Klopp yesterday. I want to run through some of them. So the first one was him reacting to a question about, looking within the squad, because I think he'd sort of been misquoted almost on the other day, or he'd said it and the journalist had made it into something a little bit different. So he said, we look outside as well. It's not that we're stubborn and think we'll go with these boys until 2050. If solutions for us were outside and doable, of course we bring players in to help. We have an existing squad as well, and we're underperforming. That is where I think I can understand Jürgen Klopp's frustration, is that we as fans, and even the journalists to an extent, even though they are slightly sort of closer to the inner goings on of the club, don't really understand what it is to build a squad, how difficult these transfers really are, how difficult it is to sell players, because Jürgen referenced it over and over again in this press conference that you can't just bring a load of lads in while a couple of them are injured, because ultimately when those lads who are injured are fit, you've then got a massive squad and you can't register them all, for example.
Yeah, who was it you were talking about before we started recording? Karius?
Yes, Karius was the one, yeah.
To then move people on and how that affects. I think that's the point, is that we understand it's complex, but I don't think any of us understand quite how complex it is, because we've never had to do the maths, we've never had to do the kind of gymnastics involved in doing that, and we can all demand what we want. But I think the Jürgen that we saw today trying to explain that was a much calmer Jürgen than pre-Brighton, in terms of not getting aggy at being asked the question, even though he's obviously still annoyed at being asked it, but kind of trying to reasonably say, look, I'm on the same page as all of you here. I don't expect to have this same squad until 2050, which I'll be honest comes as a relief. But it was nice to have him, rather than kind of getting his back up at the question, which he has every right to do, but kind of trying to explain a little bit more where he's at and what his mindset is and what he would like to be able to do, and then also the kind of like the practicalities and the considerations that have to then come into account with that. So I think we can all call to sign 5 midfielders, as I have been doing for quite some time. But I think it's only right that he explains the kind of the work in the background that has to go on around that. And it helps us understand it a bit more anyway. And we can all still be frustrated as fans. We're absolutely within our rights to still be frustrated. But I think it helps when you understand the reasons why.
Yeah, 100%. I think the mutual understanding is the interesting point, really, because he'd got a bit tetchy with Carl Markham in the press conference before Brighton, but it seemed in this one there was a bit more understanding that, look, it's dictated to by the fans. The fans love transfers. Fans want to see shiny new players playing for their football club. It's the fans that drive the clicks, earn these organisations money. So then it's the bosses who are going to these journalists and saying, we want you to ask Jürgen Klopp about transfers, about finances and that sort of thing. So it's not Carl Markham rocking up the press conference being like, I'm going to really annoy Jürgen today. I'm just going to talk about transfers, asking about FSG's money and all that kind of thing. And I think Jürgen understood that a bit more in this press conference than he did in the other one. But then I think it's important in turn that we as fans understand that Jürgen Klopp's job is really, really hard. Like, he has to build a squad, he has to keep players happy, and it's hard to do that when if you're, by all means, if you run by an oil state and that sort of thing, you don't really have to worry about building a squad, because you have an endless pit of money to just keep going. Okay, new player, old player out. We don't have to make any profit on him. Yeah. If you have a model like Liverpool's, you have to make some money on those players going out, and that's where I use the example of Karius, is that Liverpool ended up making no money on Karius because he wasn't registered. He'd sort of gone mentally by that point as a footballer. I think he only spent one loan spell out, and apart from that, he was just sat in Liverpool's training complex, probably moping around because he wasn't part of any squads.
Yeah, I think it's a difference, isn't it, between like being someone who's like, your dad gives you a business and you're playing it, running it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And you can just keep spending the money. It doesn't matter if the books don't balance. And like actually running your own business and needing to balance the books and needing to do things in a proper way is that like, I mean, that's why I feel like it was a much more kind of calm and reasonable version of what he did say to Carl, where he says, do you think if the money was no issue, if the money was in the bank, do you think I'd still be saying we're not going to make any signings? Do you think I'd still be in the position that I'm in? I wouldn't, but like the facts are the facts and this is the reality. And I guess part of that does come down to like him feeding off the frustration that we're all feeling, because we can all be frustrated, but it's him that we're asking to do something about it, and it's him that we're getting really annoyed about. And I think like after Brighton particularly, I know Paul was saying like it might finally be time to ask some questions of the fella that like we're not allowed to ask questions of. That's not about silence, that's more just about how that game played out. But I think like we all get frustrated, but he's the person that those frustrations are then directed towards, because it's harder we're not putting the club owners up every single week for a press conference. They're not having to answer questions from the media. And I do genuinely think that like there's got to be a degree to which certain press agencies or certain like certain journalists are just being told week in week out by their editors, ask him again about the transfers, because to some extent the end goal is the reaction that you get. Like that kick-off at Carl is kind of what you're trying to get a good story, to get a good headline, to get a good soundbite. Like, just keep asking him it until he bursts is like some people's kind of end goal. I'm not saying that's Carl Markham's end goal, but I'm saying that like certain press agencies and certain news outlets will be saying, just keep asking him the question, just keep asking him it over and over and over again. He'll say something else, you'll get so frustrated with you that you'll snap, or he'll say something different, or we'll get a little insight into something.
Break through the media training.
Yeah, essentially, whereas today it felt like he'd almost like taken a step back, and I do think there's a degree of like, I don't want to say we've hit rock bottom, because I keep thinking that we have, but I think there's got to be a degree of, after it gets that bad, he almost has to take a step back and go, look, like I can try and explain to you where I'm coming from here and the position that I'm in, and that's all that I can do.
Yeah, and there's an interesting part from the embargo press conference which came out a little later last night as well, where he said, this is sort of an interpretation of the quote, or a shortening of it. He says, I'm not too loyal, and in reference to the players. As far as I'm concerned, if nobody tells me, I will not go. So that means maybe there's a point where we have to change other stuff, but again, that's something for the future. And I quite like that, because there's some reassurance in there. I think one of the things that's frustrated me throughout the season is that it feels a bit like he's been banging his head against a brick wall, and then we've been banging our heads against the brick wall with this whole situation. But it said to me that he's saying, look, I'm staying here. There's no sort of question about that. If we need to make changes, we'll make changes. And there's a couple of lads out of contract this summer. That's where you imagine quite a lot of the change will come. And maybe how we've arrived at this point is because we can't get rid of those lads so easily. But it does hint at that sort of major rebuild in the summer, and I guess that's reassuring in the sense that if that's what we want as fans, if we want to bring a whole host of new players in, then that is to come. But it also means that he's not getting so frustrated with the idea that like he wants to move on, because he referenced the Dortmund situation where he got to the point where he's like, it's either I move on or we make all these changes. It feels like he's saying, no, we're prepared to just make all these changes here, because there's no way I'm going anywhere.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting that he made that comparison to Dortmund, because I think the question was phrased in a way where I was kind of like, I don't get what he's asking him here necessarily. I know that the root of it was in, are you too loyal? Because it is something that's been lobbied at him. And I thought it was interesting that Klopp goes, yeah, I've heard this. I've heard people say this about me. And no, I'm not. But I think that I think there's a number of players that you could point to, either that we've moved on recently and kind of not got what you'd want for them, or they've kind of gone after their stars risen and fallen a little bit. And I think there's still a number of players in the squad now that you can point to and potentially say that Klopp's been a bit too loyal. But then you can also look at them and see a job that they've done. Like Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, I know we're not doing particularly well at the minute, but there's been points where he has been really useful. Yeah. And also last season where when you need him, you can really rely on him, and he really does do a job. So you could make the claim that he's been too loyal to Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, but not necessarily if he's still doing a job for us. It might not be like the kind of the role that we initially signed him for, but he's doing what we need him to at the points where we really need him. And I think you can point to a number of players where you could say Klopp's been too loyal, but then you can point to where they've done a different job. I think the idea that there's going to be a big change in the summer sounded like what he was trying to hint at there, and I think a lot of us would welcome that with open arms. And I think there might need to be some awkward conversations or some difficult decisions made about who stays and who goes. But the fact that he's in a mindset to make those kind of big changes is really promising, I think.
Yeah, and there's one thing he says about the sort of football side of things, or the tactics side of things, if you want to call it that. He said to play better football than we did at Brighton should not be too difficult. Go back to basics, and from there you can make steps. We have to be more compact, and that was sort of reassuring for me to hear, because you referenced the sort of the idea of hitting rock bottom before, and it feels like if Jürgen Klopp was to say, you know, after one loss in the season, if Liverpool went on a 10-game winning streak and we had one loss and he went, we're going to go back to basics, everyone would be like, what? No, you don't need to do that. We've only lost one game. You don't need to throw the sort of baby out with the bathwater. But it feels a bit like that Brighton result, and the performance in particular should be the lowest point for this team in the season now, and it should be the point you bounce back from. And so to hear Jürgen Klopp say, we're going to go back to basics, we need to make ourselves harder to beat first, is reassuring, because all season it feels like when you watch this Liverpool side, it's been more about, we really want to get back to the way we were playing before. We want to make, big switch passes across 70 yards, and we want to be scoring absolute screamers and that kind of thing. And it's not realistic. The realistic thing is to make yourself hard to beat again and go from there. Yeah,
completely. And I like the idea that like what might bring about the change to what's been a slump or like a terrible run is not like some revolutionary or like revelatory total change, that we're just going back to doing things really simply to like bread and butter football is absolutely fine by me. And I think that it's difficult because he said before the start of the season, didn't he, that he wanted Liverpool to be more unpredictable, and there's obviously been an attempt made to change what we do, and I think that's why a lot of the time I've either looked at the team sheet when it's come out and gone, I don't quite understand how we're going to play today. Or I've looked at them and gone, I do not recognise this Liverpool squad. Like even while they're playing, gone, I don't feel like I'm looking at a Liverpool side that I recognise here. And I think that you're right, it would have been wrong to after a few defeats go, right, scrap that, change it. But I do think it takes a level of like bravery from Klopp to go, it hasn't worked, and I can hold my hands up and say, this hasn't worked. We've given it a fair shot, and now we need to go back to knowing what we can do and doing that well. And I just hope that's the case. I think that the idea that it's not going to be like a sudden transformation is important to keep in mind. If we're going back to basics, we might not immediately be like, we're back and everything's fine now and this is great, everything's changed, but that like we can build back towards that.
Yeah, well, there's some non-negotiables that you want to see, and he referenced it in the press conference, didn't he, where he said, you want to see that there is fight, and he said, against Brighton there was fight, but you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
And that's part of the issue, isn't it? Is I think you want to just see this Liverpool side now look like they are those mentality giants that he's referenced before, because I think that's been the thing that's been levelled at them a lot this season, is that mentality has been sort of eaten away out of it.
Yeah, and they do look they look lost, and they look broken. And I think a lot of the time as well, I think they almost look like they don't quite know how they've ended up here. Like both during and after games, they'll kind of be like, I don't know how this has happened, which suggests to me that it's not a complete like erosion of everything that we know. Like the wheels haven't completely fallen off. It just feels like everyone looks a bit lost, which is why going back to basics is a great idea, because everyone knows where they are and we all know what we're doing. But that's not to say that I'm in any means like I feel like every single show I've done so far this season I've gone, and this will be the restart that Liverpool need, and it's finally going to happen.
We're back.
And I just keep digging deeper into that hope, that spirit of hope. But I'm just really hoping that finally things might, if not like completely transform and get better, we'll just start to see a Liverpool side that I recognise.
Yeah, well, in the old style team talk, this would be where we would cut to the opposition view. Now that is now part of the pre-match warm-up, because we had a bit of a rejig in the summer. The pre-match warm-up is our new audio preview show, as I said at the start. That's available on the TalkPlay subscription service or on our app. If you want to have a download of that, play around with some free tokens, get a bit of free access to that content. You can watch the team talk on there as well. Emilia was on the last one. It was a great show. We had loads of fun, and then Liverpool fucking ruined it for us. We're going to go through some of your comments here. Emilia, I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of love for the fleece.
Thank you. It was a Christmas present.
So Ronnie Hot Dogs, he's been on. He said he didn't think much could top Neil's floral shirts on tour, but Emilia has done it with that fleece. There was more fleece love out there, I'm sure, I've seen it. Ronnie Hot Dogs came back again. He said the fleece is helping me forget how bad we've been recently. It's a vibe. Ronnie Hot Dogs is a big fan of the fleece.
I'm going to wear it behind one of the goals in the hope that every time Wolves have a shot on target.
I think if the entire end at Anfield on Saturday could all wear Emilia's fleece. I mean, it's bad news for Emilia, because it would then mean that it's it's trendy, as your parents would say, and that's a bad sign. But it might just increase the vibes, as Ronnie Hot Dog says. There's a few more comments here that we will go through. George J said, sign Messi, he'd sort the shit out. Fair. Messi's good at footy, to be fair. Couple more comments. There's some tour members in the chat here, which I like. I always like seeing them highlighted. Nice one for joining the channel. You can do that below if you would like to. Travel Pete says, any news on this potential Qatar deal? I'm not having this potential Qatar deal in sort of every sense, but also they own PSG, so they can't just take over ownership of Liverpool. It's not the way it works. So.
No, we said it on. We were talking a bit about it on the team talk. It's weird. The new ownership is something that like will. I'm not saying it like makes me sit bolt upright in the middle of the night and then be like, there's going to be new owners, but I do sometimes remember that it's a thing, and I'm like, oh God, this is massive, and then it completely leaves my brain for an entire week at a time, because it's just like, it's like the biggest thing that's going to happen to the club this season, but because it's not a constant thing, it's just in the background of my mind, and then I just hope that when it rears its head, it's not in a terrifying and frightening way.
Yeah, there's a lot of cries for patience here in the comments, which we like. Alan the Cat is another Tor member. If you want to be like Alan the Cat and get a nice little badge next to your name, as I said, join the channel below. He said, unlike City, PSG, Real, Barca, we are actually a business. I like that. I think there are some people who like that and who don't, and obviously respect all the sort of difference of views on that. We will look ahead then to Wolves. Emilia, the manager in his press conference, gave a bit of an update on injury news. He said there's progress with all of the players who are injured, which is nice to hear. He said Darwin is very close, but it's Monday and tomorrow is the game.
Yeah.
You know, now it's the game today. He said Milner and Bacic trained, and that's it. I'm expecting him to really rotate tonight. I'm expecting a sort of big refresh, because I think if we're talking about a big refresh in a wider sense, the easy way to sort of take some of those players a bit out of the firing line, I guess, rest some of them. I look at the likes of, you know, Fabinho and Thiago, the ones I look at all season and just think, please give those two men a big rest. And I think Salah will be another one who probably gets a big rest tonight. I am expecting wholesale changes for this game.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think that we talked quite a lot on the team talk that when you're coming up with your team and then thinking who your second and third choice are, you really quickly run out of road when it comes to like who then comes in, which is why I think you see quite a young squad. We were looking before we started recording at who the like predictions for who the Wolves team might be, and I'd say I recognise maybe 4 names, which suggests that they might be looking to do the same. And part of me fears that the reason they're doing that is because the Wolves manager's going, do you know what, these are shit, we can have like a free hit at them at this point while they're down. But I think that we will, Kelleher definitely comes in, I reckon. We give Alisson a little break. We weren't sure whether Ramsey would be allowed to come back in.
We don't really know what's going on with Ramsey.
So I'm not sure there.
Maybe Milner right back.
Yes, I'd be absolutely fine with that. And then in terms of younger lads, so Bacic was, did you say was training?
Yeah, he trained, yeah.
So there's a chance that he's
I think he would. I think I'd probably expect to see him and Elliott in midfield, and then and other, I don't know who the other would be at this stage. And then front three, I'm thinking Doak, Gakpo, and probably Carvalho. It feels like there are a few lads who maybe need some game time.
Yeah.
I'd also like to see Gakpo playing like a fun team, because I feel like it's not been a very fun team recently. I feel a bit bad for him.
It's not been a nice time for him to come and join us. I think what Klopp had said about Ramsey and about Doak, kind of like, he didn't so much say about them not being ready, but basically said like they are just dead young, and kind of expecting them to come into a Liverpool first choice first team like week after week isn't realistic at this point, and there's a lot of development to do. So that's why under normal circumstances this game would be for them, and I guess there's no reason for us to not treat it like that's the case. If we're going to try and go back to basics and do things how we would have done them normally, I guess this is an opportunity for them, and hopefully it isn't just... I guess the worry is you want to take the lads out of the firing line that we've seen at Brighton, but then you also don't want to put up a load of young lads to the slaughter and just be like, everyone's in a really bad mood, the fans are in a justified way frustrated, do you know what I mean? And then go, and here are some teenagers that we're all going to get really annoyed about because we're all already really annoyed. So I think there's a balancing act to be done with that, but I do think there needs to be a bit of a break for the likes of Thiago, for the likes of Fabinho.
Any score predictions for the game? It's tough, isn't it? I predicted 3-0 to the Reds at the weekend, and that backfired. Didn't go well, did it? Didn't go
well. I said 3-2 for Brighton, but I didn't say whether we were winning or not. So. I would like to say 2-1 to Liverpool.
2-1 to Liverpool. I'll take 2-1 to Liverpool. Usually I'd say I'm not a shithouse and go to this whole thing and give a really optimistic prediction. I'm struggling to do that at the moment, so we will take 2-1, and I'll round off on a comment from Alan G saying, Forza Emilia's fleece is right, Alan G. Download the Anfield Wrap app, subscribe to Tour Player, buy these hats, they're 20% off. Michael is waving one furiously in the background to me, so please go and buy one of them before Michael does something horrible. This one is nice. Emilia likes this one, she's going to steal it. Yeah. I might steal this one.
John, if you're watching, I'm not.
Up the Reds.